We are back and we are live. Diaspora Freedom Initiative. And today we are talking about generational wealth, the hard part. All right. I've mentioned multiple times in the past that the easy part is money, right? Some of you guys who are stuck in ruts and having issues keeping money flowing might think that money is the hard part, and it might be for you, but it's not for generational wealth, right? So the number one thing to remember is generational wealth has nothing to do with your wealth. Okay. The next thing to remember is that there's a pretty good chance, if you're 30 or older, that by the time generational wealth hits, you're not even going to be there. Okay. So there's an old African proverb about planting the tree, the shade of which you're never going to sit in, right? So generational wealth plans have to be set up for the next generation. If your generational wealth plan is, I'm going to get rich, and then the next generation is going to inherit all the riches that I, created, your generational wealth plan is faulty, to say the least. To be nice, it's faulty. Okay, so your generational wealth plan has to be focused on the next generation being wealthy. Okay, the easy part of that is money. Why is money the easy part? Because generational wealth is achieved um, through compounding, and compounding just requires you to leave money alone. All right, that's all it essentially needs. So if you took $1,000, put it in the S&P 500, it should historically gain 10% a year. So if you left it there for 100 years, it would compound 100 times at 10%. And every additional year, the 10% is off of a bigger principle, right? So if we want to use really, easy numbers, if it's $100, then the first year there would be $1, right? Of return on investment, right? So your 10% on that $100 would be $1. The next year you don't have you know $100 anymore. I'm sorry, $10. I just woke up, so let's go easier. $10. Your 10% on that $10 would be $1. The next year you have $11. All right, so now instead of $1, it's going to be $1.10. Okay, so the next year you're gonna have the 11 plus that 10 cents in there again, right? So now you're dealing with 12 and 10 cents, and then you're gonna get 10% on that, right? So the compounding is pretty easy to understand. It's pretty straightforward. Whatever the rate of return is, or your average rate of return, depending on how long term you're going, that's the compounding every year. Okay, excuse me. That's the compounding every year. That's retardedly easy. Okay, ridiculously easy. You put money away, you don't touch it, it grows. Period. There's nothing to it. Okay, the fact that so many people don't do it for their children is ludicrous. Right? You put money away, you don't touch it, it grows. Period. That part is not hard at all. That's really one of the easiest things that anyone can do if they're not self-centered. A lot of folks don't do it because they are self-centered, because they need every plan to benefit them instead of thinking about the next generation. So that kind of person, this doesn't even have any value to them, right? But someone who's actually thinking about the next generation, right? It's beautiful to know that you can put the next generation in a situation where they don't have to worry about money. Okay, and everyone can do it. Doesn't matter, you know, what position they're in financially. Everyone can do it. It just takes time. All right, so that's the easy part. Excuse me. hear the roosters going in the background. I actually woke up late for this one today. I was asleep 10 minutes ago, so bear with me. I normally wake up like an hour early. All right, so what's the hard part? The hard part is regulating family, as far as regulating their education, regulating their literacy, sometimes regulating the value system, and making sure that all of those things align with actual wealth. All right, the difference between generational wealth and temporary wealth, right, which is typically intergenerational, right? So what ends up happening is your generational wealth is perpetual. Your intergenerational wealth goes from one generation to the next and on the way it dies. So in the intermediate there, while it's going from one generation to the next, it dies out and never gets to the next generation, right? So we typically look at generational wealth as something that's hit two generations. Now that doesn't mean that you won't be there for it, right? To see that it's actually hit, right? So it's not like, well, the next generation and then you've died and then the generation that's not the way that works, right? It might work that way because we never know when our last day is, but it's definitely not required to work that way. And in general, we don't see it work that way often, right? So you will typically see that the generational wealth has taken, right? And that it has crossed over from one generation to the next and one more generation. You typically can see that, right? Even our folks that start at 30 years old can still typically see that, right? You start at 50, maybe not. It all depends on how much you start with initially, quite frankly. But what you need to have is the difference between those two is typically their knowledge of stewardship, right? Stewardship is a tiny word that means a whole lot, all right, when it comes to generational wealth. All right, it encompasses a ton of things within the generational wealth spectrum. So your wealth has nothing to do with the amount of money that you have. Your wealth has to do with, are your passive income, and your passive investment strategies operating, and are they growing better than inflation, essentially, right? So are they compounding better than inflation, right? So as long as they're compounding better than inflation, then you should be all right, okay, as far as building wealth. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a billionaire or even a millionaire, but if you're compounding better than inflation passively, then you're typically wealthy. If you have passive income that beats your burn rate, you're typically rich, okay? So if you spend, I don't know, $5,000 a month, but passively you make $6,000 a month, then you're rich. Passively, remember that. Passively. Can't be, I spend $5,000 a month, but my job pays me $6,000 a month. That's not rich. If you spend $1,000 a month and passive income is greater than your burn rate, that's rich. Okay? If your passive investments, return on investments, are beating inflation, you're wealthy. Okay? So, now how do you maintain that with the next generation? Well, you're out there fighting, doing whatever you got to do, figuring it out. And then your kid has never had to fight for anything. How do they maintain what you built? That's one of the principal questions that make it difficult to actually build generational wealth and have it pass on from generation to generation to generation. Right? So, where does it start? The money is the easy part. So talking about the money is almost a waste of time, right? Because we already understand that all you have to do is compound any amount of money. The smaller the amount of money, the longer you have to compound it. The larger the amount of money, the greater the results are going to be from compounding it quicker, right? So that's the way the money works. It's easy. It's not worth talking about past that. Either you're going to do it or you're not. All right, fine. How do you maintain the generational wealth? That all boils down to education. All of it. The first step is to absolutely make sure that you have your family constitution together. All right, that's the first step. It's probably the most important thing that we've seen from every single family that we've brought across into generational wealth planning, right? Is that the family constitution, not only is it important on the planning stages, but it's also important from the sense that it solves all the problems that destroy their generational wealth moving forward, right? So problems will come up, right? We've seen all kinds of problems with clients who have gone through their family constitution. We've seen the dad slept with the son's wife. We've seen the sister stole the sister's husband. We've seen all those crazy things that destroy families and tear them apart. We've seen those things happen. Folks that had a family constitution, a proper one, would always have a conflict resolution section, and that conflict resolution section will actually have punishments in it. And so we've had plenty of clients come back to us and say, if it weren't for the conflict resolution section, our family wouldn't be talking to each other anymore. And if your family's not talking to each other, they're definitely not building generational wealth together. All right? The family has to operate almost like a company. It has to know who's in charge. When something goes wrong, HR has to be impartial. There has to be an employee handbook. Everybody has to know the rules. When someone breaks the rules, they have to be punished according to the rules, no matter if they're the favorite grandkid or not. That's how it has to work. All right, that has to be the baseline of the conflict resolution, or else your entire generational wealth is fucked because uncle couldn't keep it in his pants. That's stupid, right? You're going to destroy generations worth of wealth because one fool couldn't keep it in his pants. That's not the way that any family that has any kind of success generationally is going to operate. So then how do you get past that? Because that's a big deal, right? Uncle couldn't keep it in his pants and slept with the nephew's wife. That's a big deal. How do you deal with it? That's going to be in the conflict resolution section of the family constitution, and uncle's going to pay for that. Might be financially, he might get sanctioned, he might get kicked out of the family. He's going to pay for that, and the rest of the family is going to build generational wealth. They're going to keep it moving. You think nothing like that's ever happened to a Kennedy? They're human beings. You think nothing like that's ever happened to a Rothschild? You think nothing like that's ever happened to a Rockefeller? They're human beings. They go through the same bullshit that we all go through. But when it happens, there's essentially a family court that's built into their family constitution. The elders sit down and review everything. They don't hold bias. They don't treat anybody like they're the favorite or anybody has any special treatment. They go by the conflict resolution article of the family constitution and they punish whoever was wrong. And then there are no sides. There are no this half of the family isn't talking to that half of the family. There's only this person was punished for what he did. He lost shares in the family company. He lost shares, in the family trust. He got cut off. He's not getting any more payments. He got kicked out. He doesn't wear the family name anymore. Whatever the case might be. All right. He's been sent to rehab. It all depends on what happened. Right. Much like regular, law in regular society, depending on the severity of what happened, would depend on what the consequence is. Right? But these things save families. When you leave people to their own devices and you have half the family wondering who was right, who was wrong, I side with so-and-so just because I like them. I don't even know what the hell happened, but I like them, so I'm on so-and-so's team. I'm on so-and-so's team, and the whole family is ripped apart. Now you guys have destroyed your entire future over some idiotic issue that could have been solved by a family tribunal. right? So these are the hard parts, the human being parts, right? These are the hard parts. So family constitution first, right? Period. You start with that, and then you move forward, and you make your family constitution can have any rules you want, any rules you want, right? Your family constitution, your inheritance can skip generations, right? We just had a billionaire in Singapore do that, right? The Nippon Paints billionaire. He owns the entire Nippon Paints dynasty. Inheritance skipped his children and went to his grandchildren in the family trust. His children are the trustees. His grandchildren are the beneficiaries. You can set it up any way you want. It can go to whoever you want. Doesn't matter. All right. But what does matter is whether or not they have the proper education to maintain the family dynasty. You give everything to a bunch of spoiled idiots, they're going to burn it in one generation. All right. So the education is as important as the Constitution, as the conflict resolution section of the Constitution. All right. Those two things have historically been the most important things to maintaining a family dynasty in the nearly 2 decades that we've been doing this. All right. Let me see what you guys are saying. Wow, somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. All inheritance goes to males, not females. Maybe in your country, that's not universal, and you can decide where your inheritance goes. That's crazy. All right. All right, so yeah, bit of nonsense in the chats. I don't see any legitimate questions, though. All right, so we're good so far. Moving forward. All right, so conflict resolution, definitely number one. Spend a lot of time there. Beyond conflict resolution, you want to set up the sociological artifacts of your family. All right, sociological artifacts of your family. Okay, so once those sociological artifacts are in place, you want to make sure that you hold to them. It can be anything. Okay, it can be a holiday dinner that you have, and you want to have 2 or 3 levels of them, right? So you want to have reoccurring artifacts that reoccur, maybe even weekly, right? You want to have specialized artifacts that occur annually, and then you want to have like quarterly artifacts that occur as well. Okay, artifacts become traditions. All right. In sociology terms, your artifacts will become traditions. All right. And they'll change with different branches of the family. And you'll actually get to a point where you can identify which branch of the family someone is from by the distinction in the traditions that they hold. All right. But that's long down the line. You want to start with the artifacts. Right. So things that we see often are things like there might be Friday family pizza night, every Friday they clear the living room, move the tables and the stuff out of the way. They drop a blanket on the ground, make a pizza together, and enjoy family time. Maybe they watch a movie, maybe they read books, but whatever it is that they're going to do, but they do it as a family weekly. They create a routine that creates memories as a family weekly, and they encourage certain values at that meeting, right? It's an informal artifact that will become a tradition. All right. So whether it's movie night, then you make sure that you curate the movies. If it's almost like a book club and you're reading books, then you make sure that you curate those books. You make sure that everything is focused towards having the right level of education, culture, so on, so forth. Right. Super important. And bringing that family together. Right. It's almost like team building in a corporate setting. Got to make sure that the family is ready to work together and ready to come together and have extraordinarily strong bonds, because the hard times are going to come. They're human beings. Crazy stuff is going to happen. They're not going to have a perfect life, no matter how much money has been set aside, right? You need them to have the interpersonal skills that they can then project into the world. You need them to understand how to engage with academic disposition. If you don't know what academic disposition is, that is a lie for another day. Google it. All right. But you need them to have academic disposition, and you need them to be able to have that confidence and those skills to sit in rooms and sit at tables that maybe you couldn't even sit at. Right. But if you educate the next generation properly, they will be able to sit there. Right? Super, super, super important. Highly overlooked by idiots on social media talking about money, 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 money. The money is the weakest and the dumbest part of this entire thing. The education and the financial literacy is the most important part, period. Period. Bar none. All right? Holding stewardship over the sociological artifacts. Incredibly important. Bar none. You don't realize how important it is if you don't come from a dynastic family. Right? But one of the simplest quotes out there is, if you want something you never had, you got to do something you've never done. So if what you got going on isn't what you want, then it's time to increase the education and fix some things. Right? It's time to do some things that you've never done before and get that going. All right? So family constitution, absolutely imperative for generational wealth. It's the hardest part, especially if the family already exists. That adds a level of difficulty, right? Some folks, they might be immigrants, they might be, orphans, whatever. Some folks are actually have the wherewithal to design what their family's future is going to be and move forward from there, right? So some folks do that. That's a lot easier because you only have the inputs of the professionals that you're working with and their history and their expertise to guide you, and then exactly what your vision for your family is going to be, and you move forward from there. It's a much easier situation than, folks that are coming in with their entire family. And so now they're in a situation where 20 people who have never had generational wealth, 20 people who have all kinds of weird different mindsets, are in the room, arguing about just getting the Constitution together in the first place. Right? So that's going to be a ridiculously challenging situation. And when you get on the other side of it, you're going to be all the better for it. It's almost like therapy, quite frankly. Right? So when you get on the other side of it, you're going to be all the better for it. And the family is going to be on the same page. Right? Worst case scenario, we have seen this happen multiple times, but worst case scenario is certain parts of the family are going to expose themselves as not having the proper mentality to be able to get it done, right? One of the mindsets that sometimes present this way, but is typically easy to fix, or that's probably not the right word, but I'm going to use it in that context anyway. It's probably the easiest one to fix, is the know-it-all. You're going to have somebody popping up in there who swears they know everything, who swears they know which stock to buy, who swears that fiat currency is bullshit, gold is the truth, gold is bullshit, Bitcoin is the truth. You're going to get one of those idiots who has $10 in their bank account. They know everything, right? So that's going to be a come to Jesus moment where you're going to have that conversation about, okay, since you know everything, please show us your results, which typically pipes down that situation. And then we all get real. We stop with the TikTok bullshit, about all the ways we know to get Rockefeller gold, and we start getting real, right? So there's typically always one of those, right? So you got to get those out of the way. That's easier to deal with than the person who legitimately has a bad mentality around life and a bad mentality around wealth and money and the whole nine. Okay, so if you got one of those, then in a worst case scenario, they're going to get annexed. In a worst case scenario, right then and there's going to be a new branch of the family, because the branch of the family that got nothing but excuses is going to have to go figure it out on their own. All right, so there's really no way to change that and turn that around that we've seen in the nearly 2 decades that we've been doing this, and our peers who have been doing it for centuries, we've never heard anyone have a fix for that. If somebody just has, a non-conducive mindset, because it's not a wrong mindset actually, right? It's just not conducive to what you're trying to do. It might be completely conducive to what they're trying to do, right? So if somebody has a non-conducive mindset, then they essentially get annexed right then and there, right? So now your branch of the family is a branch of the family that's building generational wealth, and their branch of the family is doing whatever, right? Oddly enough, this was years ago. I'm trying to remember what organization they were affiliated with, which took us aback. And I can't think of it, but it was a gang. It was a gang organization, right? So there was an uncle in the family who had really wild mentalities about how things should be done, and he was like, a member of a very notable gang organization, and that's where his mentality was, and you couldn't break it. So there had to be a delineation there, like, you go run your gang, you go do your illegal stuff in LA, do what you do, the rest of the family is going to, build legitimate generational wealth, and we'll have nothing to do with you anymore. To the point where the rest of the family changed their last name, right? You don't have to go that far, but they did. Because for them, the type of illegal nonsense that this guy was into and the mindset of where he was, they didn't even want their family to be associated with what was eventually going to happen to him, which it did, right? And so when you run into those situations, then you got to make those hard choices, right? Is your family going to have nothing because you got some idiots in your greater family, or are you just going to annex those idiots and go ahead and move your family forward, right? So those are the hard decisions that sometimes come up when you're doing your initial family constitution, and other family members have to be there, right? So if you're doing it with the 9 brothers and there's 2 brothers that are idiots, right? Well, you might come out of it with the 7 brothers, right? So just be prepared for that. Remember, the whole point of generational wealth is the next generation. It has nothing to do with you, right? So if the questions that are coming up during the conversation about generational wealth are, how do I get rich? How do I make more gold? How do I make more money? You're in the wrong conversation. It has nothing to do with you. Your generational wealth plan is all about what will the next generation have. Most originators of generational wealth died broke. The first Kennedy died broke. The first Rothschild died broke and couldn't read. Right? Most originators of generational wealth families die broke. It's the next generation that they gave an opportunity to, plus the education, that are the first generation that actually have wealth. All right? Now, that's not all of them. It's just most of them. But if your mindset is about you, then it's not going to work. All right? The generational wealth is stupid easy. Stupid easy. Any amount of money can compound, period. Any amount of money can be invested and it can compound. Even if you have a bad investment and you're getting shitty compound rate, over time it will still grow. The money's easy. That's not the hard part. The hard part's the mentality. The hard part is the education. The hard part is keeping a family of human beings who are going to make mistakes and piss each other off together over 100 years, right? That's the hard part. Now, some of that we personally make easier on our clients by utilizing the trust system. So there's a corporate trustee. There's not necessarily members of the family with their fingers in the pot screwing things up. But that's not enough to save the family, right? You need all of those aspects in place to make sure that the family understands what it's doing. They understand the purpose of the family. They understand their place within the purpose, right? And so, bringing us back to the family constitution, that means that in that family constitution, there's going to have to be a goal for the family, right? There has to be a goal set up for the family that the family is pushing towards, okay? There has to be morals or ethics, right, that surround how the family achieves its goals, okay? There has to be some kind of understanding as to what that family's social responsibilities are, because they have to have some, right? Is it philanthropy, right? Is it, do you give back in the realm of medicine? Do you give back in the realm of science? There are even some families that, you know, give back in the realm of religion and spirituality, right? There are families that have family cathedrals and family churches and stuff like that that are open, you know, to the public and things of that nature. So all of those things have to be figured out by the first generation. All right, there are some things that don't need to be figured out, but we're not going to talk about them because they're low priority. They can be figured out 3 generations later. We're not even going to discuss them, right? We're only just going to discuss high priority. So all of those things need to be figured out by the first generation. Okay, and then your experts have to get involved because as flexible as, you know, like your trust deeds and your trust organizations may be, laws change. And so the language in those documents have to be able to be adjusted to maintain legality over hundreds of years, right? Like the Rockefeller Family Trust is still valid, even though, you know, it's 100 years old. How does it maintain with new tax laws that just got passed last year when it's 100 years old? How does it maintain validity, you know, this year when it's 100 years old? Because the language is going to be designed so that the trustee can adjust what needs to be adjusted to maintain the spirit of whatever the original rule was within the new law. That's important, right? That's the number one mistake that rookies make that destroy their trust, because that type of trust is irrevocable. So if you don't create a mechanism by which it can be adjusted, it can't be changed at all. And then you're screwed. And then whatever, you know, money is in the trust might be trapped there. Right? So you got to make sure that when you're dealing with irrevocability, you're dealing with professionals to walk you through that. All right? Super, super duper important. Okay, let me see if there are any questions. Is college worth it? It might be. It might be. Most of the families we deal with, they have a scaling system. All right, so college is on one side of the scale. Tech school is somewhere in there. Even apprenticeships are in there, like with some folks. So, you know, if you're an apprentice carpenter, right? Apprentice carpenter might be equal on their scale to an associate's degree, right? Or what international schools might call a diploma, like a collegiate diploma, right? So if you have an associate's degree, or you have an apprenticeship in a trade, or you've opened a business and it's been open for longer than a year, they might have it set up that those things are equal, and those things all unlock certain levels of the family trust, right? So now that you've achieved, you know, that kind of basic level, maybe something unlocks for you, right? Then you get to a bachelor's degree. Well, the bachelor's degree, you know, might be the equivalent of a novice tradesman. Now you've gone, you know, from apprentice to novice, and then on the other side, you've held your business open for 3 years. Okay, fine. Now we get to a master's degree. Well, that might be a journeyman. Now you're a journeyman, you know, carpenter or whatever the case may be, and that might be equal to the bachelor's degree. And then on this side, it might be that you now actually really have a business, right? So that definition is typically you've owned the business for 5 years, and 3 of those 5 years you've had a profit, or you've broken even. If you haven't, if you've had a loss all 5 years, typically that business is reclassified as a hobby, and you are a hobbyist. All right, that depends on your tax laws in your jurisdiction, but that's typically the way it goes, right? So those things might be equal, and then, you know, you go from journeyman carpenter to master carpenter, and that might be your PhD, right? And then on this side, now you have a thriving business. Maybe it has to have a certain amount of employees, and you've had 5 years or more that are profitable, right? So you can set up what the equivalency to all of those things are within your constitution or within your trustee, and they can unlock different tiers of access to the family trust, right? You want to make sure that most things are a meritocracy. That's how you combat nepotism, right? So it can't just be like, oh, here's all the money in the world. You should go to college with it. We set up this family trust funds for generational wealth. Now you get to start with $1 million. Go do what your heart contends, right? That's not going to work. That's going to create nepotism. It's going to create the worst type of people that you could ever imagine, and that's going to be your legacy. You want it to be a meritocracy. You want it to be, did you get a degree? Oh, well, college isn't for me. Okay, that's great. Go start a business then. Oh, business isn't for me. Okay, cool. Go start a trade. Trade. Okay, so you're just lazy. You're cut out. Next, right? So you don't want to lock people in so badly that you're actually hurting them, right? Because maybe college really isn't for them, right? But something's for you, though. If your excuse is nothing's for you, all right, then goodbye. Next. We're not playing that game, right? So those people who put in, the work and earn the merit are going to get the most reward from the system, so that you make sure that you're building people of character, right? You're not building people who have an excuse for every solution, right? You're building people who have a solution for every excuse, right? So that's what you want to look at as you're building up what milestones people are hitting. Don't be too stringent on, everybody has to go to college. Maybe, but maybe not, right? Maybe you're going to have a trade dynasty. And we definitely have a few clients that have trade dynasties. We have folks that made their money in garbage hauling, and that's the backbone financial pillar of their generational wealth. And all those kids got to work on the trash truck, right? And they're multi millionaires now, right? They're out of there's a place in Morgantown called BFI, and they own that entire dynasty, right? And so multi millionaires, we did their generational wealth trust and all of that stuff, and all their kids got to get on that trash truck, right? Multiple times. Like they're I think they start, I think in Pennsylvania, it's 16. You can like work as a kid. They start at 16, and every summer they got to work that trash truck, and it's summer, so it's even worse. The flies and the stink and all of that. Every summer they got to work that trash truck until 18, right? And then they can go into like the corporate, but they're still at the dump. They're still at, the dump, but they can go inside into like the corporate and deal with that end of the business. They do that until about 21, and then they can go do whatever they want, right? They can go out and do whatever business they want to do, or they can be part of the family business and so on and so forth. But there are folks that it's not all lawyers and doctors and all of that, right? There are folks that make their money with their hands, and their kids have to understand that, and their kids have uh, to at least be exposed to it. But even them, they're not locked in. They can go become a lawyer. They can go become a doctor. And they have a pretty even split. There's either 4 or 5 of them. I feel like there's 5, and there's one that like no one talks about. but the 4 that I'm familiar with, of those 4, 2 of them went into like white collar stuff. But they do those white collar jobs still for the family business. So like one's the family lawyer, and had a real prestigious like law education, and had a great career. So went off and worked for a pretty high powered firm, for about 5 years, and learned everything. Because when you come out of law school, you know how to speak legalese and research law, right? That's it. You really don't know much of anything else. So you do have to get with a firm, and you have to learn how to do briefs, and you have to learn how to argue whatever it is you're going to argue, and so on and so forth. So they sent them out. Typically, it's the firm that represents the family business. You got a multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar even family business. You got a high-powered law firm on retainer, and part of that retainer can absolutely be, that we can send you, law school graduates, at will, and then you got to give them 5 years of internship at the very least. So that process was went through, and now that person leads the in-house legal team, for that trash empire. I think the other one was, I think he's a doctor. I think he's just a straight up doctor. and then the other two are in the business. So there's one that's like some sort of, I don't know if he's the president yet, but he's some sort of high level managerial guy in the business, and then the other one actually leads the fleet of trucks. So he's in the business, but it's almost like a subcontract. So he opened like his own logistics business and then connected it back to the family business, which is always a smart move as well, right? So by having a meritocracy within the the family constitution, it allows you to avoid nepotism to the best of your ability, right? Which is probably something that you want to do. So you want it to be this kind of meritocracy, but you want the meritocracy to hit when people can make their own decisions. Before that, it should be a dictatorship like any other household, right? Ain't nobody voting with mom and dad on what's for dinner, right? Households are run as dictatorships, just like the military. So while you have kids that need guidance that don't actually know what they want, that you're supposed to be telling them what they want or at least guiding them on how to figure it out, that's how the household should be run. Once you get to an age where folks can be held accountable for their own decisions and they need to start learning that way, that's where the meritocracy should set in. All right. And then you let it blossom from there. Okay, makes sense. You're welcome. You're welcome. Excellent. Okay. Okay, good. Any other questions there before we move on to the next phase of the hard part? You Meccan? I'm assuming that's mentioned. You mentioned academic disposition. Okay. Ugh. All right. So there's a ton of sociology that goes into all of this. Okay. A lot of this has been studied for years and years and years. There's a French sociologist who did a lot of work. There's a few American sociologists who did a lot of work. All this stuff has been studied for a very long time. Academic disposition is something that tends to happen in households that are focused on generational wealth and or focused on stewardship. Stewardship is almost your long way path to generational wealth. Now, once you have generational wealth, you have to have stewardship anyway. But sometimes families focus on stewardship first, and that leads them to generational wealth. It essentially builds the habits that are going to guarantee that you end up at generational wealth. All right. So academic disposition comes from that, and I'll give you a few examples in a moment. I'm 21 years old, work full time, go part time community college. Very nice, good idea. I'm trying to self educate on business online. Any advice for where I can better find resources? Yeah, just you want to Google it, but you don't want to use Google, right? Google, well, I don't know if they admitted it, but their internal documents came out in court that Google actually makes their search worse so they can show you more ads. So they make it so that when you search something, you don't find it. So you have to search it differently, and search again. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is you want to type in scholar.google.com and then search for what it is that you want to be educated on, and then you'll only get facts. You won't get anyone's bullshit, right? So it's a completely different server of Google that does not depend on ad business and does not give you bad search results just to show you additional ads. So, but yeah, I mean, we have the internet, so you have it all at your fingertips. You can do it. I don't know which business you're trying to get into, so I can't, point you in any more specific direction than that. All right, so academic disposition. Academic disposition teaches the children of dynastic families that they can participate in academics and that they should participate in academics until they're satiated by whatever information that they wanted to get out of the participation, right? So what does that like look like? Um, it looks like why do I have to do my homework? Okay. And the family that's not building academic disposition says, because your teacher said so and because I say so, just do it. Right now, why do they do that? I don't know. There could be a ton of factors. They could be working, like she just said, she's working full time, she's going working part time, she's going to community college, maybe she has a baby. All right, or maybe he has a baby, or whatever the case may be. Maybe they have a baby. And so now they get home and the baby's whining about why it has to do, or the toddler's whining about why it has to do its first grade homework, and you just got done working two jobs and doing an online course, and you're tired and you're grumpy, and why are you asking me these weird questions? Just do it because I said do it. So do it, right? And so what happens with the disposition of that child? They shouldn't be asking questions, or they don't have the right to the answers. One of those two things is being set in, right? I don't have the right to quality answers, right? Or I shouldn't be, asking these questions. I should just be doing what I'm told. I should keep my head down and whatever. Does a parent, are they trying to do that? Probably not, right? But like I said, it's the education that destroys everything. All right, so what's happening in the other house, right? Right? Why do I have to do my homework? What's the other household saying? What do you think homework does? I don't know. I think it just punishes me. What do you think practice does? Oh, I remember this. Practice makes perfect. Do you think that homework is practice? Well, yeah, but I know all of this. Did you tell the teacher that you know all of this? Maybe they can give you something more challenging so that you can practice something, a little more difficult. And practice leads to what again? Oh, practice makes perfect. There's a different conversation happening, right? There's an academic disposition being built. So now, what's going on with kid number two? Kid number two now feels that questions create educational situations that they're a partner in. They feel like they have a right to quality answers. They approach questions in that way, right? So they raise their hand in class. They treat the teacher as a partner in their educational journey, which is exactly what's happening. But most of the kids in that class do not have the right mentality to recognize that, right? The teachers start making judgments on the kids in the class based on their disposition, because we're human. And unfortunately, that's the way we work. So the teachers start leaning in to the kids with the academic disposition and leaning away from the kids that don't have the academic disposition. Cognitively, both kids might be identical, right? But the non-intentional, home that is not intentionally creating an academic disposition in their kid now has a kid that the teacher is looking at as non-engaging, doesn't raise their hand, is staring out the window during class. I'm not paying much attention to that kid. They're not disrupting class, but they're not engaging either. Versus this other kid who's asking questions, has respectful banter back and forth, and is walking down the rabbit hole with the teacher as a partner in the educational process, right? So that kid's going to be uplifted because they have the tools they need to succeed in education, and that was part of their generational wealth. See how the money is the stupid easy part? How hard is it going to be for you to discipline yourself to be intentional when your annoying kid is asking the same question over and over and over again, right? And if you don't think that happens, you don't got kids, right? When the annoying kid is asking you all the questions they know the answer to over and over and over again, mommy, is this a ball? 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 They know it's a ball, right? But the way you engage with those annoying questions intentionally starts creating dispositions that give your kids the social tools to succeed, right? This kind of grooming, this positive form of educational grooming, starts at home. It's never taught in the schools. The schools reward the families that teach it and discipline the families that don't, right? The kids that don't have that intentional foundation are going to end up in school suspension. They're going to end up in detention. They're going to end up doing bad with the homework. They're not going to ask questions. They may even fall behind. Okay, but they're inadvertently being taught all the skills that a child needs to be a laborer. They're unintentionally being taught all the skills that you need to work on the assembly line. And that might be their trajectory. And it might just be because the household didn't understand the sociology of generational wealth. It's not all money. Money is the tiniest little stupidest piece of it. That's why lottery winners don't gain generational wealth. They typically are broke within 3 years. Right? You're welcome, Christian. Is it Chris? No, it's Kristen. All right, Kristen. Sorry about that. Yeah, well, so when you're talking about nature versus nurture, it's all very situational. So that's why you got to sit back and, game out the examples, because it's all very situational to what's going on in that house. The intent has to be to build confidence. To wrap it all up into a nutshell, the intent has to be to build confidence. The more confident that kid is, real confidence, not false confidence, right? False confidence would be confidence that's not based in a meritocracy. That would be false confidence, right? So you telling your kid that they can be president because, they're your kid, versus your kid joining a cadet program or joining some kind of, kid program and being voted, president of the program or captain of the program or, MVP or whatever, are two different types of confidence. One is not going to work out well. The other one is going to work out extraordinarily well, right? So social proof is going to build real confidence, which is why kids will get to a point where they don't believe their parents anymore. Because most parents won't build social proof confidence. They'll build conjecture based confidence, and that will either hurt confidence, where it's my mom just lies because she's my mom, right? And it'll either hurt their confidence, or you end up with arrogance. Fake confidence leads to arrogance, right? So you want real confidence, which is based on meritocracy. That's a weird question. What is the time frame of your consultation? That's odd. My consultations can happen anytime. There's no wait list for a consultation with us. Maybe you mean something else. So go ahead and ask it again if you meant something else. Yeah. Well, with this, typically we'll do the family wealth workshops for this, right? Or the family constitution workshops. I'm sorry. So typically, you know, like we're not gonna sit there and consult. I don't. Maybe that's what he meant. Are you trying to? Are you trying to interpret what he meant for me? But yeah, but typically we'll do a family wealth, a family constitution workshop, and then we just get done with the family constitution. We go through all of this stuff during the workshop. So that takes about 6 weeks. It's not a short situation. And you got a whole bunch of like homework in between, right? Because you got to sit down and talk to your family and get this thing ironed out, and all that. But if people kind of have that worked out, or they have a system in place, and they whatever, and they're just trying to set up their like offshore family trust or something like that, then you can just do an initial consultation. What's the time? Oh, like how long are the consultations? It depends on which consultation you choose, right? Like a discovery call is only 15 minutes. It's free, and it's just to figure out whether it even makes sense for us to work together. A initial consultation is typically no longer than 45 minutes, and it costs something. I know our prices are going up in a couple weeks, so um, I'm not sure where the pricing point is on that at the moment. Some people are doing like international business expansions with us, and they're having like a trust fund own the new international business and stuff like that, where they need our lawyers in that very first meeting. So that's a longer meeting. It's typically like an hour. And there's more than one person on our side. Somebody from the legal team, somebody from operations, typically me, and whoever else needs to be there as part of that meeting. That obviously also costs more because you're paying for more people's time. So it just depends on what kind of like meeting you're having with us. Yeah. So typically, first base is going to be family constitution. Absolutely. If you're focused on generational wealth, all right, that's one half of our business. The other half of our business is like immigration, right? So we have an immigration firm, and then we have a generational wealth firm, because we have a law firm in Mombasa. So those are the two focuses and kind of specializations that our law firm leans into. Now, on the generational wealth side, absolutely, family constitution is typically the thing that creates the mindset, right? There are some existential crises that are avoided via the family constitution, right? One of them is why am I here? What's my purpose in life? Why was I born? Blah, 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 blah. That's a waste of time. That can be avoided, right? A lot of people will be like, oh, there's no manual to life. There can be. You just didn't write it, right? And so if those things are in place, you avoid certain existential crises that may come up, even later in life, right? So like if you're in a dynastatic family, you may also skip your midlife crisis. That doesn't have to happen, right? And all of those things are crises that are based in self-identity, right? So the midlife crisis, absolutely based on self-identity. We can all see that, right? He goes out and buys a Ferrari and da. Okay, fine. But the why was I born thing is also based in self-identity, right? And not knowing who you are, not knowing why you're here, not knowing what you should be doing, being very confused about life, maybe not identifying that there are role models around, or actually not having them, right? All of not having mentors available, so on and so forth, right? So all of those things are identity crises that can be solved in advance, in a solid family constitution where they know who they are based on the family constitution. Like no one asks those existential questions. Because a lot of people are like, no, 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 that's part of human development. You can't skip it. That's bullshit. No one asks those human development questions about their nationality, right? No one asks, why am I American? Why am I a Canadian? Why am I a Brit? What does it mean to be a Brit? What does it mean to be a Canadian? What does it mean to be an American? No one asks those questions. No one has that existential crisis. Why is that? Because they all have constitutions. You know, at least on paper, what it is to be those things. You also know if it's bullshit. But that still gives you direct knowledge of what that is, right? Like you might know, like, oh, to be an American means life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom. Now, if that's bullshit, you're American and you know that's bullshit, that's fine, but you still know. You're not questioning. And that's why those existential crises don't happen there. So, based on just life experience, we actually know already that we don't need to go through those crises. But now, how many of us have, and how many months, weeks, even years has it set us back? How much time did we waste on the nonsensical journey to find ourselves that could have been handled in a couple lines in a family constitution? How many kids have joined street gangs while going through those existential crises? How many have joined Boy Scouts, Civil Air Patrol, cadets, whatever programs you might have? Again, going through those same, which is positive, but, you know, how many decisions have been made based on this lack of knowledge that you could provide for your family in the family context, right? So these are the soft powers, right? That influence the growth within your generational wealth so much that you're never thinking about. And that's why when people focus on money, and that's what they think the generational wealth is, it falls apart. It's a 75% chance, statistically, that it falls apart in the first generation. Why? Because most of those people, there was some joker on the YouTube side earlier talking about gold this, gold that, gold. All he cared about was money. He can go build that money, and his generational wealth will fall apart in the first generation, right? So too many people think it's all the money, and the money solved everything, and the money is everything, and they don't set up the structure and the foundation. That's even why these criminal organizations fall apart. And then there are some that don't. What's the difference? Right? What's the difference between the street gang and the Chinese triads? Foundation, formation. They have rituals and social artifacts that they follow, right? So it works across the board. It doesn't necessarily matter what you're doing. It matters how you do it. And it matters what kind of education, what familial system you're bringing. And one of the most important things is a conflict resolution. And what are the punishments? And what's the surety of punishment? Surety of punishment is the only thing that allows a correctional system to operate. Any law enforcement system, any judicial system, any correctional based system, what allows it to operate is the surety of what will happen to you when you violate it. If you're unsure, then it will be as though the system doesn't work at all, like it's not in place at all. If you have no idea what will happen to you if you rob a bank, then you go ahead and you rob the bank. You figure it, you find out, right? If you know you're going to go to jail for 20 years, that's the keystone of the deterrence, is the surety of what's going to happen to you, right? And so the best systems of deterrence and the best systems of conflict resolution have a high surety of what the discipline is going to be, or what the consequence is going to be for the action that requires correction. If there's not a high surety that something's going to happen to you or what it is, then you're just going to violate it. All right. That's what our youngest kids are trying to do. When you tell them not to hit something and they look at you, they look directly in your eye and hit anyway. They're trying to figure out what's the surety of consequence here. Because if there is no surety of consequence, I'm going to run all over mom. I'm going to hit when she tells me not to hit. I'm going to throw when she tells me not to throw. I'm going to spit when she tells me not to spit because there's no surety of consequence. Right? But as long when that instant corrective action happens and it happens consistently, and I'm now sure that I'm going to get that consequence every time I violate the social order, that's when people, fall in line and are like, okay, I know as soon as I do this, I'm going to have to pay this consequence. And it's not worth the consequence that I have to pay. That's the other big part. If it's worth it, then maybe I'll do it and just serve the consequence. So you got to make sure that it's disproportionate as well, right? But that has absolutely been probably the most important and the number one section of all family constitutions is conflict resolution. So you're going to hear me say it many, 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 many more times in the future because it is literally the most important part, right? And then one of the most important aspects is that you follow through, of course. So it'll be tested, and when it's tested, if you fail that test, that's it for your family. That is it for your family. They will remember. Well, you would figure that out. And that would actually be typically not just in the Constitution, it would actually be in your trust deed as well, right? Which is a next step. But initially, it'll be in your Constitution. And you figure out how that worked. So it could look just like court. Sure. If that's the way you want to set it up, it could look like that. It could look like mediation, right? So it just depends on how you want to set it up. I'm reminded of a Cosby episode. Actually, that's funny. I'm reminded of a Cosby episode that I haven't thought about since I've seen it. It's the first time I've thought about that. Drawn back to my memory by your question. But there was a Cosby episode, and I don't even remember what the kids did. But the kids did something, and the Cosbys held court. Any of you guys remember that episode? Wow, that's such a random memory fart. But the Cosbys held court. They had their own family court, and I think Bill was the judge, and they had representatives like the kid that was accused of doing whatever. One of the other kids served as their lawyer, and you know what I mean. And there was a ruling at the end and all that. Wow, that's But yeah, I vaguely remember that episode now. But you can set it up that way. I mean, the rules are going to be up to you. You want to be as simplistic as possible, right? So that you don't jack anything up. But you can set it up any way you want. I'm gonna go find that episode of the Cosby Show. Wow, the things that are buried in there that you never think about that you thought you forgot. Hmm. You understand daily traditions like pizza night. Okay, you had a pizza night. Okay, cool. It looks like you ran out of characters. I'll wait. And I understand annual traditions like Thanksgiving or Halloween or Christmas. Yes, but those are greater traditions. You want your own family traditions. For example, we have a Memorial Day. It's not the Memorial Day, it's our Memorial Day, right? And so the Memorial Day is on my dead father's birthday. And on Memorial Day, we have to we don't have to do it on the day, but we have to commit to a charitable act on that day, right? So Memorial Day was just a little while ago, actually. And so for us, there's a school that's in total disrepair, and so we're gonna go fix that school. Like we're gonna build the school for them, right? So that'll happen in like a week or two. But every Memorial, so that's our. It's not like Christmas if you're a Christian, or Thanksgiving if you're, an American, or Halloween, or, all of that. Those are greater, and you can still do those, if they fit, but you should have your own. But what I don't understand is the what? Are you talk to texting? Check whatever it is you tried to write there. Oh, the intermittent rituals, or the intermittent. Okay, so oh, this is a perfect example. So this is my wedding ring. There is a tradition. Oh, I have multiple live streams and not all the cameras can see it. Okay, everybody can see it. Okay, great. This is my wedding ring. The men in my family have a large stone in their wedding ring. The stone comes from the birthplace of their wife. So my wife is from a place called Meru in Kenya. In Meru, they have aquamarine mines. And this aquamarine is from the Meru mine, right? And so that's a tradition that we know internally, right? So it's intermittent because it doesn't happen until you get married, right? So again, it becomes a source by which the men can gather around and discuss, and this is the tradition, and this is what you got to do now, and blah 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 blah. If you're going to to marry this woman, right? And the women in the family, their their wedding rings typically have stones. They could be small stones, right? Because the guy's going to engage them. He might be a diamond. It might be whatever. Okay, fine. That part is done. I've said yes. Now there's a tradition in our family, right? So now the second ring, the one that you get when you pass the engagement ring, the actual wedding band, there'll be small stones in that band. Now, what if there's no gems, right? What if you marry somebody who comes from a place where there are no gemstones? Then you get stones and polish them and inlay them in the band. So sometimes you'll see there'll be like maybe three stones, and three stones, and they're just like regular like rocks. They've just been polished. You know what I mean? But they'll be from wherever that person comes from. So that's just a tradition of ours. It doesn't necessarily have to mean anything more than it's something that we do, that and we understand it because we do it, right? So those are the intermittent traditions, things like that. Sometimes they happen by accident. Sometimes they happen on purpose. You know. Sometimes they're the result of a tragedy, like like my father's death created, a Memorial Day. So it just depends. Well, you're touching on a secret of stewardship, right? Um, and that is storytelling, right? So typically, in dynastatic families, things are introduced via storytelling. Even people are introduced via storytelling, right? And what you're telling a story of is typically something associated with their meritocracy. Right. So we tell the story of our our patriarch's life, my dad's life or whatever, during Memorial Day, and then we go out and we help somebody. And typically, there's no tax benefit associated with that charity. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, yeah, great questions. What's the other ring? What's the other ring? This is a crest ring. Now, because I just encountered this the other day. If you're going to use something like a family crest, this is actually a full coat of arms ring, right? And so if you're going to use something like a coat of arms or a family crest, it needs to be real. Okay, we just encountered the other day someone who made up their coat of arms, like they just drew a pretty little picture and called it a coat of arms. This is going to erode confidence. Remember, we were talking about real confidence and fake confidence? This is going to erode confidence when the next generation finds out that it's fake. Okay? So, can you just draw a pretty little picture and make it part of your family? Yes, but do not call it a coat of arms. Because if you drew a pretty little picture and you want it to represent your family, it is not a coat of arms. It has not been granted by a grant of arms by a heraldic authority, which is what a coat of arms is. So do not fake it because the next generation will find out that you faked it and it will harm their confidence. You don't want to do anything that harms the confidence of the next generation. You want everything to be a meritocracy. And you want to understand exactly how it works. Right? Don't fake it. Better to have less merit than to have fake merit. Well, it's the same thing as like stolen valor, right? You wouldn't tell your kids to go fake being a military veteran, right? So don't fake that you have a coat of arms. No, you can't look at your last name up in a book and find it. That's all bullshit, right? Arms have to be granted by a grant of arms. So there are certain things like you can build out all your stuff, and like I said, you can make a pretty picture and you can call it the symbol of your family. That's fine. That's what it is, right? Now you're being honest. So that honesty shouldn't result in any kind of lack of or any kind of degradation to confidence. But don't lie. Don't fake. That will destroy the confidence of the next generation and probably yours too, right? Fakers typically live with a whole lot of imposter syndrome. Well, I mean, you got to look at it historically. Is that true? If that was true, how would I know that the first Rothschild was a cobbler who could count, obviously, because he got paid, but he couldn't read? Don't you think that the mega rich Rothschild family would have hid that if you just hide it afterwards if that was true? It's part of their confidence base. We came from illiterate nothing to being the dominant banking family in the world. What have you done? Right? So it's part of their confidence base, so they don't hide it. But your assumption that they do says more about your mindset than anything. Look into that. Figure out why you assume that somebody would have been deceitful and dishonest. Figure out whether those things exist inside of you, and that's why that was your first thought. And then correct it if you feel like it needs to be corrected. It can be a good tool. In this context, it can be a good tool. I know a lot of people that practice stoicism. So it can help. You have to be intentional about how you utilize that as part of the education of generational wealth. Because if it's education, then you're educating the next generation. You're educating the youth, right? So you just have to be intentional and how you implement that as part of their growth. That's the biggest thing here. That's the thing that so many people forget and, quite frankly, screw up. It is their growth. Your generational wealth is allowing them to grow, right? That's why, in the example of scholastic disposition, there was a bunch of questions about how that child felt about the question they were asking, not you telling them what you think they should know or telling them the way that you did it or what it means to you. It's about them exploring what it means to them, and doing that from a position of authority so that they build confidence in the thing, not uncertainty. So it's not about you. And until you can wrap your head around it being not about you, it's not going to work for you. Sure. um, what is a heraldic authority? That's fun. Heraldic authorities are all over the place. They don't really have any in the United States, so there's that. Um, in England, it's the College of Arms. There's heraldic authorities in China, Australia, all over Africa. Um, the heraldic authority for our coat of arms is the College of Arms of Kenya, right? So there's heraldic authorities all over the place, and essentially, they'll grant you arms when when your family has done something, or you've opened a foundation or something like that, or you open a school. Most schools, like private schools, have a coat of arms, things of that nature. From the UK, excellent, excellent. Just subscribe. Thank you. Uh, I am from the U.S. I no longer live in the U.S. I live in Kenya, but I'm from the U.S. Hmm. I'm observing the banter. I'm only answering questions, but I see the mindsets all over the place. You got to take a step back and think about your mindset. Think about whether your mindset is taking you in the right direction or not. And typically, that's really easy thing to do, right? Because where are you? If your mindset's taking you in the right direction, then where you are should be, an indicator of that. So where are you in life right now? And if you're not where you want to be and you're not heading in the direction you want to be heading in, then you should probably take a look at your mindset. It's a difficult thing to do solo, that's true, but it's not an impossible thing to do solo. Especially now, especially not with technology being the way they are. Hey, Fatima, thank you. Right, so adjust the mindset and life will definitely adjust for you. Let's see here. What do we got? Mom's retired Tier 3 NYC comptroller attorney. Okay. Do you have a pitch deck for her? No, no. No, we're not pitching anything right now. No startups. We don't need any funding at all. Yeah. That is one of the beautiful things, I suppose, about the family trust. At least right now, with the setups that we're doing in Kenya and the interest rates on the Kenyan bonds, most people who are setting up a family trust out here are actually waterfalling bonds, and so their family trust is actually funding itself, and the because it's funding itself through the coupon payments, the the transition from the initial capital to the compounding target, which is just something that the person who sets up the trust figures out. Like if they say I want $1 million in the trust, then you got to figure out, well, okay, well, how long will it take to get there at the current interest rates? And by using the waterfall, it's actually been cutting down that time frame to like 20 years and less. So that's pretty cool. Are you in Kenya? I am in Kenya. Oh no, I meant an explanation of how easy it is to relocate. Um, an explanation of how easy it is to relocate. Well, the ease is depends on the person. It depends on whether or not they're engaging professionals, what they want their relocation to look like, what does a successful relocation look like to them? Is it successful for them to come out here and like live in an apartment? Do they expect to have a full on trust estate, which those are two, polar opposites. So it really just depends on what they want. So no, there's not like a blanket pitch that we like give people. It depends on what their goals are. Do you help set up their bank accounts without clients being there? Yes. And again, sometimes it's a mindset thing. The clients are here, right? Because typically the client is a trust. So the trust is here. But yes, we do. I'll encourage her to join. You're like, yeah. If she lets us know like what her goals are, then we can definitely say, okay, well, your goals align with this. But the other thing is, excuse me, if she lets us know what her goals are and her goals don't align, we will absolutely tell her like, no, don't come here. Like it's not going to help you, go. And if we know where to go, then we'll let her know like which country is actually better suited for her. Yeah, it happens every now and then. Like somebody wanted to do an IP company, and so then the IP laws here they're not bad, but they're not the best. The South African IP laws are the best IP laws on the continent, and so if they want to do an IP firm, then they're better off going to South Africa to do that. And so that's where they went. But but yeah, it don't make sense for us to just take someone's money and set them up and not set them up in the best position possible. But for the most part, Kenya is a pretty solid choice. How many kids do you have? You keep asking the questions about the scholastic disposition and the intentionality in the home. So I see that's struck a chord with you. Twins. That's awesome. That's awesome. Congratulations. How old are they? Just turned two. All right, my guy is about to turn two. All right, yeah, no, I mean we can definitely get in. Maybe I'll have a live just on that. But it's completely situational, right? That's the issue with like the lives with the examples and that stuff is like the house situation might not be the same for you, so it's going to manifest itself differently in your house. But yeah, we can get into it. I'm sorry, I missed your answer to my question. Oop, let me go back and get the question then. Sorry about that. What was the last question you asked? Yes, we do, but depending on the setup, the the person isn't not here. The person is here, right? So you're thinking if you're not here, that the person's not here for the bank account. But if you have a trust fund with us and your trust fund is managing everything, the trust fund is here. So it's not as difficult as you might be thinking. But even if we're doing a direct bank account for a client, we have banking relationships with multiple banks. So within those banks and those banking relationships, we can do it. If you ask a different question, then it didn't come through. So ask it again. Sometimes TikTok just blocks things. It just doesn't like the way that they were asked or whatever. And I can't see them. I'll get a little note that says something about, to protect the community, certain comments have been removed. So I won't even be able to like approve them or not. Um, well, it depends on whether it's funded or unfunded, and it depends on which kind of trust you're talking about. I'm assuming you're talking about a family trust, like a generational wealth trust. If you're talking about a generational wealth trust and it's unfunded, then you're talking somewhere around like 6,000. Funding, it's up to you. So, you know, if you're going to fund it, you can decide what you're going to fund it with. But typically, a funded trust, now you're talking about like maybe 10,000. If it's an asset protection trust, it's different. It depends on what assets are in the trust. Again, if that's not the defining factor, because so for example, I have a family, like a family of four, that have come through and done a generational wealth trust, right? Because they're focused on their kids having a future, but they're not millionaires, right? So they don't have assets. They don't need an asset protection trust. And then I got single 22-year-olds who work in tech, who are coders, for companies in Silicon Valley that have $10 million in assets, and they're single guys, and they don't well, they do need a generational wealth trust, but they're not focused on that right now. They're focused on protecting all the toys that they've bought, and so they want an asset protection trust. And so like they're completely different ballparks. So single isn't really the factor. It's more, do you have assets? And if you do have assets, do you have enough assets that you need an entire legal structure to protect them? And then if the answer to that is yes, then it becomes how many assets do you have? Because that's gonna change which country we protect them in, right? If it's I'm focused on making sure that my future family, even if I don't have that, is good, and so I want to start the generational wealth, then that one would be a family trust. So it just depends. Like someone with 10 million in assets is getting their asset protection trust in a completely different country than someone with 1 million in assets. And both of those people are getting asset protection trusts in a completely different country than someone who's doing a generational wealth trust, because the jurisdictions have different benefits. None. We don't have any, because we're not the trustee company, so we're not managing any of the assets. We said that we'll assist in setting up the trust, but then the trustee company or that person can take over as trustee. There's no mandatory requirement for you to use a trustee company, but if you're American and you take over as trustee, you've just created a shitstorm of IRS filings that you now have to handle every year, and you have to declare where all the bank accounts are and all of that stuff. If you have a corporate trustee and you gain non-grantor status, which go to irs.gov and type non-grantor trust into the search bar if you want to know more about that. But if you do that, then you have no legal obligation to the IRS as far as any kind of reporting is concerned until there is either a transfer of a U.S. asset into the trust or there's a distribution to a U.S. citizen from the trust. And if it's a generational wealth trust, that could be 60 years from now. So it just depends on what that person specifically needs. We have, um, you know, made a decision to create 100 generational wealth trusts by the end of this year. This is our thing for this year, so that'll be our focus. So you'll hear us talking about those trusts again and again and again. So right now we're at three for this new year. So 3 of 100. It's it's super important to us as a community, I suppose, that that we really start emphasizing generational wealth for the next generation, because the nonsense that we see on a daily basis is ridiculous and preventable. And so we've decided in 2026 that what we're going to be doing as part of our new year is going to be that we're going to be setting up 100 new families with generational wealth via the generational wealth trusts and going from there. So that's the impact that we want to make for this year. Last year it was relocations. We hit, you know, those relocation numbers. We exceeded them by what, 300%, 200%. Okay, three times. Okay, and so, and yeah, so, um, so we'll see what happens this year. It'd be great if there were 300 new generational wealth families by the end of the year, but our target is 100. So we'll see what happens. We're off to a good start. You're really interested in the family constitution. Yeah, yeah, no, you should be. You absolutely should be. Um, we're probably going to have a family constitution web workshop in probably a couple months. So just keep your eyes open for that. We'll announce that and we'll get a family constitution workshop going. If you were to try to book it on our booking link, there would be no dates available. So you can also use that as kind of a measure. You can like try to book it, and if you see a date available, that means that we're starting a workshop. Um, and then typically it's 4 to 6 weeks to get to the end of the Constitution workshop, and then at the end of the workshop, you will have your family constitution, which typically leads directly into a family trust. So that'll be an option that you guys will have. And then creating a trust deed from a family constitution is absurdly easy. Creating a trust deed from scratch is a more difficult prospect. So those three family trusts that have already onboarded for this year, they're all from scratch. So we almost have to go through like the family constitution process with them to even figure out what kind of trust deed they should have. So yeah, definitely easier if you start already with a family constitution in place. Can you have more than one trust? You will. You'll have many, many, many trusts. Like this nonsense with the Kennedy Center right now. You're going to notice that people show up and their last name is Stryver. You're going to notice that people show up and they have all these different last names, but they're Kennedys, right? So what ends up happening is you start your family constitution, you start your family, right? You start your family, your original family trust. And eventually, through marriages and stuff like that, branches pop up. And those branches will create appendant trusts, right? So they'll create trusts that end up being the beneficiary to the original family trust, but for their branch, right? So Arnold Schwarzenegger was married to a Kennedy, but her name was Stryver, right? That's a Kennedy branch. And so right now, you're actually seeing a bunch of the branches pop up because they're all talking about the Kennedy Center thing. So when they're talking and it says, oh, the grandson of, and the nephew of, and here's the cousin of, and the da 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 da, you'll start seeing all these different names that are not Kennedy, but they're all attached to the Kennedy Family Trust, and they have their own family trust, right? So what ends up happening is when that name changes, and it depends on what's in the trust deed, but when that name changes, a trust has to be created for the name change, and then that trust would be the only beneficiary to the original family trust for the new name. And that trust might have completely different goals. And again, it depends on what's in your trustee. You could dictate that, you know, of our 10 family goals, you have to maintain three, right? And if you don't maintain three, then you can't be part, of the family trust. You're just doing something different. Just start your own trust, start your own family, call it a day, right? So it just depends on how you set it up. That's where your professional comes in, right? Oh, sorry. So the question was how do you know what to set up in the trustee? That's where your professional comes in, because you don't know. We encountered, this is a story I tell a lot because it's really simple to understand, but we encountered a client who already had a trust that was designed to generate revenue for their children's college fund, and it did it through real estate. And so they wrote the trust themselves, and it had all this stuff in it about how to manage the real estate, and because that was a business that they obviously had experience in, and all this stuff, how to manage real estate, where the money goes, how to keep the taxes, whatever, and blah 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 blah. And then they hired a corporate trustee, so it would be a non-grantor trust, right? They can't touch the money; it's for the kids' college, and by making it non-grantor, they didn't have a tax, burden associated with it. And so, and so what ended up happening was they forgot to put the eviction clause. And so somebody came on hard times, stopped paying the rent, and then the trustee was like, I don't have the legal right to evict them. And so now you have an irrevocable trust that's in place that owns these properties, knows how to collect the money, knows what to do when it collects the money, knows what bank accounts to put it in, knows all of that stuff, right? Those the annual inspections that need to be done, all of that stuff is in there. But the one thing you forgot is what happens when someone doesn't pay you. So it ended up taking about 2 years to get a judge to break the trust, because that's what needed to happen based on the way that that trust was written, because they wrote it themselves. And so the girl who had stopped paying, who ended up finding out that there was nothing that could be done for not paying, ended up telling everybody else, you don't actually have to pay. They can't kick us out for some reason. I don't know why, but I just know that they can't kick us out. And so by the end, no one in any of their properties was paying rent. So there goes their kids, collegiate future, because of a stupid mistake that they made to try and save money. And it costed them a ton of money to even go to court and get the judge to break that trust. And then guess what happened? Once the trust was dissolved by the judge, all those properties shot back into their names like that. Now what did the IRS do? The IRS said, "Oh, you just earned a couple $1 million worth of income, a couple $1 million worth of property just shot back into your name. That's awesome. Pay taxes." So now they got to go to tax court, got to go to Treasury court, and explain that there was no gain, from this situation, and get everything set up in a new structure, right? So when you're doing things that are irrevocable, you need professionals, because you're not going to be able to anticipate what could or couldn't go wrong in those situations. So you need other people that have experience who can anticipate. All right, well, what do we do when the shit hits the fan? And this is how it's going to hit the fan. Now, what do you want to do about that? You have to have all that stuff already set up in the trustee as to how you're going to proceed with those things. And if something does need to be changed, because of some outside third party legal matter or something like that, there should be something in there that allows for a change to be made, but does not allow for your trust to be weakened by the ability to make that change. Because a lot of folks will try to do that. We've seen somebody try to do it with Chat GPT or some nonsense like that, and they left their trust wide open. And then it was already funded. So that was the end of that. Another 2 year court battle to undo the trust. So yeah, don't try to save money on irrevocable trust. You want to play around with trust, make sure it's a revocable trust. Then you can revoke it at any time, like whatever. If for whatever reason it floats your boat to play around with stuff that you don't understand, go for it with a revocable trust, not an irrevocable trust. Irrevocable trust, get an expert. Oh yeah, so it's just a matter of jurisdiction. Offshore is going to have your highest protection because no local judge is going to have that trust within their jurisdiction. But it has to be a country that doesn't respect your local jurisdiction as well, right? So it has to be a country that if a local judge does make a judgment, the judges in that country are going to ignore the judgment, right? So it's not going to be enforceable in that other country, right? So you got to make sure that it's not enforceable in that other country. What happened? You don't see that wind behind me? The wind blew the bottle off the ledge. We're getting a good ocean breeze today. Yeah, yeah, no problem, no problem. You ask good questions. There's good banter going on though. You guys are like really discussing things well. Probably the most I've ever seen. Normally you guys are like asking me questions, but you guys are doing good talk. Well, on some of the live streams. It is interesting the way the different live streams work. YouTube is normally super quiet, or there's just random people popping in saying random things. Um, I would say that Facebook and TikTok ask the most questions. So yeah, 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 it's interesting. There's different personalities to the different social media live streams. Hmm. That's an interesting question. How do you know whether you need generational wealth for your family or not? That's a really, really interesting question. Um, if you're not sure, it'd be interesting to know why you're not sure. It I'm almost tempted to say if you're not sure, you probably don't need it. Because if you're not sure whether or not you need generational wealth as an adult, then you're probably extraordinarily wealthy. Like if you're not sure whether or not you would need your kids to be, settled in life and to be able to have opportunities that overall wealth, again, not just money, could provide, then you're probably incredibly wealthy. And well, yeah, there's that. If it's the extreme opposite, it may not matter, right? So there has been that. There have been people that just couldn't execute, and then it becomes a matter of like, all right, you're wasting your time. Either pass the torch to somebody else in the family, or like stop and dedicate to learning this. You know what I mean? Because there have been, I hate to say it, but there have been people who were, they just didn't have the intellectual capacity to assist their family in any meaningful way in those regards. And so it's like, oh, wait, if you're not going to take this serious, like pass it to your brother or something, or, let your wife take over, or like whatever the case is going to be, or recognize that this is what's going on and, go to community college and get educated, or whatever the case, uh, needs to happen. But it's a reality. It's a reality. A lot of people like to act like anyone can do anything, but some people are just not cognitively where they need to be, and that's just a reality of it. And it's our job to just let you know that. Like, it sucks if it hurts your feelings or whatever, but we got to be truthful about this stuff, not just take people's money, and then they get no benefit. You know what I mean? You got to be willing to understand your deficits and where you're failing, and how to correct them, and lean into it. Typically, by the time people get out of generational wealth, they don't even have excuses anymore. Like, their mindset has changed so much that they don't even make excuses anymore for anything, right? And which is a beautiful thing in and of itself. And then all they see is solutions. Everywhere they look, they see solutions. They don't. There are no excuses anymore. So it's a good transformation to go through. But if you're stuck, then there's some people that are just cognitively stuck. In a place, and wherever you're stuck is real. It's true for you, right? So if you're cognitively stuck in Excuseville, then all those excuses are real for you, and there's not much anyone can do about it. That changing of the mindset has to come from you. Well, yeah, and that's why anyone kind of preaching this everyone type of thing, is just a marketing ploy. If they're focused on everyone, doing one thing, or everyone uniting under one banner, or everyone, if that's the focus, which has never happened in human history, then it's just either a pipe dream or just some kind of weird marketing ploy to get as much money as they can, right? And then move on from there. But people who are being legitimate, people who are being realistic, they know that if 10% of the addressable market engages with them, that's an incredible win, you know. So it's never going to be everyone. Not everyone's going to be ready for it. Not everyone's going to be capable of it. That's just the way it is. If you're a specialist, then you will dismiss people who are not capable. You won't just take their money. That generalists will. But if you're a specialist, then you'll just tell them no. Well, you make sure that you have a passive income stream. So that's like, so our relocatees and all of that, and even our end of year special, which is still running, even though we've kind of made this like New Year's resolution thing, all include like bond laddering, right? You don't think that we were telling you all to bond ladder and we didn't bond ladder, did you? So the bond laddering creates passive income for the next, up to 30 years, okay? Which essentially puts you in a position where, for our relocatees, they don't have to work for the next 30 years. But you can bond ladder for the business. And if you bond ladder for the business, it means that the business has passive income without having clients for the next 30 years. But you don't need, to be desperate about customers to the point where you're just taking people's money to take people's money, versus being choosy about the clients you accept to work with, right? So the same strategies work across the board, right? So we have clients that have done multiple ladders. They got a generational wealth bond ladder where those bonds are waterfalling into their family trust fund, creating money for the next generation. They got a personal bond ladder so that they could retire and not have to work anymore, and live off of the coupon payments of that bond ladder. So that one's not compounding. and then at the end of the maturity that you get, all your initial funds back as well. And then they have a business bond ladder so that their business is operating and everybody's being paid and all of that, um, off of the passive income streams of the business. And so what they're doing on the active streams are essentially bonuses, right? So, it's all about having it together on the planning stage, and, you know, and then you don't have to worry about nonsense. You want to be in a position of FU in no matter what you're doing. So if it's business, you want to be in a position of, if some crazy person comes in your business, you don't have to take their money. You want to be in a position of, if you're still working and your boss says something crazy to you, F you. You don't have to worry about that paycheck. Like, you want to be in the global position of FU and then operate from there. Changes everything. All the stress leaves your shoulders. You don't care what nobody thinks. It doesn't matter. There ain't nobody in control of your money. You don't care if people boycott your business. F you. Got 30 years worth of passive income coming out of bonds that are paying 18% return on investment. F you. Nothing you can do to shut down my household. Nothing you can do to shut down my business. I don't even own the bonds. So even if I got into a car accident, I injured somebody, you can't take them. You can't take my sources of passive income because they're not owned by me. They're either owned by the trust or they're owned directly by the business. So it's one of those things where that's where you want to be. You want to be in that position, which is why all the dynastatic families operate from a place of FU. Kennedys don't care if you like them. Rothschilds don't care if you like them. The Rockefellers don't care if you like them, right? Then there's nothing you can do to them. They have passive income coming in that is completely removed from any clientele. You can try to cancel them all you want. You can try to boycott them all you want. F you. That's where you want to be, right? So once you got that going on where your passive income is taking care of everything, nothing else matters. Then you do what you want to do. Then you have the impact in the world that you want to have, right? Like, we put it out that we're going to go over there and build that school. We let people know, you know what I mean? We put it out on Facebook. We put out, anybody want to help us build the school? Help us build a school. Not a single person want to help us build the school for the kids. Does that matter? Nope. We snap our fingers and build the school anyway. We don't need the people. It's just that if people wanted to help, build the school for the kids over the holidays, we're here for it. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But we're not depending on that. We're not sitting there with a GoFundMe campaign trying to raise the money on that. We decided we were going to build a school. We're going to build a school. That's the end of it, right? So that's where you want your family to be. You want them to be in that position where they don't care about external factors. You want everything to be based on the decisions that you made that are pumping passive income, into the family, into the trust, into whatever other structures you got going on, and then any kind of active income is just a bonus. Make sense? Get yourself to a position of FU. Yes. Yeah, I mean, if there's a paltry amount of money available, it's going to take 60 years. It is what it is. Would you rather it never happen? It is what it is. If you start compounding with, you know, $400, it's going to take 60 years. It's going to take maybe 80 years. It is what it is. You start compounding with $80,000, you will retire the same year. Right? If that's your plan, if that's what you want to do. Now, you may have to relocate. You're not going to stay in the same, community and retire, right? But you can do it. You know, we do it all the time. We'll bring somebody over, we'll do a bond ladder for them, and they never have to work again, instantaneously. Cost them $85,000. So if you start, with a ton of money, it's faster. If you don't have a ton of money, doesn't matter. The money is the easy part. It'll compound over time, and your family will still be okay. Because this is for the family, not necessarily for you. I see your mindset waking up. That's correct. It's just an excuse. It's just an excuse. You can compound a dollar. Might take 300 years, right? But you can compound $1 if you can find a place to put it, where it's going to make 10%, even 8%, even 6%. The lower the percentage, the lower the amount, the longer it's going to take to compound into anything that's, reasonable, right? Even if your compounding is below the rate of inflation, it's still going to compound out because eventually you'll get to a place. The inflation only affects your buying power, not your unit, availability. So eventually, when that unit doubles, it's going to double to a place where it surpasses inflation anyway. It might just take longer, so that might double the amount of time it gets to that point. But you're starting out with something small. If you're starting out with $10 and every year you get another dollar, you know, and then it incrementally increases. So now you have $11, and so you get a dollar and a penny or something like that, and it incrementally increases. There's a point in time where the $10 becomes 20, and then the 20 becomes 40, and then the 40 becomes 80, and then the 80 becomes 160, and then the 160 becomes 320. Like those doublings happen at intervals. So even if your initial rate was actually below inflation, it's not a good thing, right? But eventually, it'll actually double out of that horrific situation, right? It just takes time because inflation isn't constant either. So the money, that's easy. That's the easy part. It's the education, having the education, getting yourself to a mental position where you can execute properly, making sure there's financial literacy afoot, right? And you're not all financially illiterate. You understand what money actually is, right? You understand what inflation is. Um, you understand what a coupon rate is. You understand what ROI is. You understand what maturity is. Making sure you're financially literate, and then making sure that you're stewards of the family. If you do not have stewardship, which is alive in and of itself, right? Stewardship is a huge philosophy. And if you do not have stewardship, it will not work. And that's the number one thing that the people who are asking about themselves in the comments are indicating is that they do not have stewardship because it's not about you. It's about the next generation. It's not a personal wealth life. It's a generational wealth life. It's not about your wealth. It's about the wealth you leave to future generations. So the people who can't wrap their minds around that already got a problem with stewardship. So it's not for everybody. If you can't wrap your mind around it, just don't do it. You'll be better off not doing it. If it makes sense to you, then get into it. If you want your kids to have better lives than you, get into it. If you don't want your kids to have better lives than you, which I've met plenty of people who verbally say that, women at that. This is the first woman I ever heard say it. It was crazy. It was 20. I can remember. It was the year 2000. I was in what's the name of that place? Um, Man, I can't remember the name of the little town I was in, but I was in the Inland Empire, Escondido. I was in Escondido, in California, on the phone. It was late night, maybe 10 at night. I was talking uh, uh, to this client, and I remember her saying that she didn't want her newborn child to have anything better than her. Crazy. It's the first woman I've ever heard say that. Since then, Yeah, I've heard many people say that. They want their kids to get it out the mud. They don't want their kids to have better than them. They can't wait to kick their kids out the house at 18. They can get their life back, as if the kids magically, appeared in their womb, right? But there are people who that's the way they think. This is not for them. This ain't gonna help them. They're not even going to do it properly or at all. So if you don't want your kids to have better than you, just keep it moving. This is for people who want their kids to have better than them. This is for people who, want their family to be better every generation and have more opportunity every generation. That's the type of people that should be involved in this. The people who are not, about that, that's fine. Continue on, with whatever it is that you're about. This isn't for you. That's all. Yeah, no, that was impactful. I remember exactly when that happened. That was impactful. It was a crazy, crazy conversation. Where was she from? That's an interesting question. She was from Trinidad, actually. She was Trinidadian. Hmm. Yeah, no, we don't convince people of anything. Yeah, if you need to be convinced, this isn't the place for you. Yeah, or we're definitely not. The ones that you want to be dealing with. We don't convince people of nothing. And you know what? There's people who I guess like that's their mo. There are people who are so surprised when we drop them because they were playing that convincing game, and we're just like, oh, that's cool. This doesn't seem to be like what you want to do. All right, not a problem. We won't waste any more of your time. Wait a minute, wait a minute. What do you mean? So I don't know where that comes from, but there's a ton of people that want you to tell them what to do, and when you won't tell them what to do, and you're like, look, you just don't know what you want, so time for you to go. All of a sudden, they're like, oh no. And it's like, no, that's not what we're here for. We're not here to convince you to do something that you've never thought of or that you don't want to do or anything like that. Like, if you've never heard the concepts and you hear them and you immediately resonate, like, oh, that's what I've always wanted, that's one thing. But, we're definitely not here to convince anybody to do anything. You do what you want. You build the family you want. There are certain tools that you might need that you don't have access to, and certain knowledge that you don't have access to. That's what we're here for. But we're not here to convince anybody of anything. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, yeah, it's really weird. You know what? It's funny. I remember, and I kind of hated sales for this, but I remember meeting someone who was like deep into sales, and they were like a door-to-door salesman. And I remember them saying that every time they knocked on a door, and the person was like, "Well, I ain't gonna buy nothing. You can come in, but I'm not buying nothing." Like they would light up because like that was the person who was going to spend the most money with them for the day. And I remember like when I first heard that, I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. you know, but it was absolutely true. Like this person was running. I forget what they used to sell, um, but in school, while we were taking business classes and all that type of stuff, there were people who were already in business and already in sales and already, doing that type of stuff. And he was absolutely right. Like he was absolutely right that like they were all talking to themselves. They weren't talking to you. They were all telling themselves like, all right, we're not going to buy anything this time, but they weren't really talking to you. You just happened to be there and they were talking out loud. And so it was really, really, but those kinds of situations never sat right with me. And I think it's a generalist versus a specialist situation. You know what I mean? And so generalists can do that. If you're in general sales or you're in general business or you're in general whatever, you can have like these people who, you know, apparently don't really want to spend with you, or maybe just addicted to spending or something like that or whatever, because it's transactional. Specialists typically have a situation that's not transactional, right? So because the specialist situation isn't transactional, it means that they're typically going to be with you for a certain amount of time, right? For us, it's normally like 7 years, right? Because we're specialists. So we're normally with our clients for 7 years. Could you imagine selling something to someone who didn't want it and then being there with them for 7 years? Be pretty fucking uncomfortable, right? It'd be crazy, right? To be sitting there next to them for the next 7 years after you like manipulated them into some kind of like weird sale, right? So specialists operate different than generalists do. And yeah, we don't do that. So you'll see with specialists, we just do a bunch of education. Like here's the education, accept it or don't accept it, want it or don't want it. If you want it, come talk to me or don't come talk to me. Go find someone else, like whatever, right? Because as a specialist, your people are always going to find you. It's crazy, like, but that's what happens. And so the people who work with me are always going to work with me. The people who work with, other options are always going to work with those other options. But specialists, it's like we don't even have competition, right? Like our the other specialists that are other options specialize in different things than us. So it's as if we don't have any competition at all, right? And then when people want exactly what it is we specialize in, essentially their only choice is to come to us or not get it, right? So that's what happens when you end up building yourself up to being a specialized firm, and you specialize in one or two things or even three things. um, then those people who are going to come to you, and the rest of the people can absorb information or not, and that's up to them. But your people are always going to be your people. You're not competing with essentially anybody other than maybe yourself. So that's the way it works. Now the sale guy isn't wrong. He's just a generalist. You know what I mean? If he can convince you to buy a Kirby vacuum cleaner and then never see you again, or convince you to buy some Amway vitamins or something and never see you again, um, then he made a general sale. He's a generalist, you know. But as a specialist, it's different, right? Like a dentist is a specialist. If he puts veneers on you, he's not going to never see you again. He's going to see you every year for the rest of your life, is the way it should go. And he's going to check the veneers and do bring in the hygienist and do a teeth cleaning and right? Like you're never going away because you just dealt with a specialist. So if the specialist scams you on your veneers, right, you got to see him, for the, yeah, obviously you can choose another dentist or whatever, but it's just not good business. So specialists and generalists just operate differently, right? If I convince you that you need a pet rock and you buy the pet rock, it's a general sale. I'm a generalist. If you're not happy with the pet rock 2 years from now, that's not my problem, right? So this, when you're dealing with specialists, they're with you for an extended amount of time. That's why we still get stories from trust funds that we created 15 years ago, right? Because they still come back to us, even though we're not the trustee, right? They still come back to us. They still update us on what's going on. We do other business with them. Maybe we create a new trust for them. Because eventually, if you start with the generational wealth trust, you will get to a place where you need an asset protection trust. So, our family grows. We had, oh man, when were they born? I want to say, they opened their first trust in the 60s. but it wasn't well done. Luckily, it was a revocable trust. And they came to me. We had a different company that was U.S. based at the time, but they came to me right around, what was it? Maybe 2012. And we did a domestic trust. I hadn't gotten into international trust yet. So we did a domestic trust for them right around 2012, and we rolled the revocable trust into the domestic trust. And they had started that trust in like 1960 something, 1970 something. And they already had three generations of their family alive, right? So it was like they had kids, one generation. Their kids had kids. There's two generations, and they were still alive. So there was three generations already in play. Already in play. It was like 40 or 50 of them. The social media manager, I think, just found a couple that had like over 100 people in their generation. So I'm assuming there's a fourth one there. I'm assuming there's them, and they had kids, and their kids had kids, and now some of their kids have had kids, and they're all still alive. So it can pop off fast. It can pop off fast. So when you get started with your generational wealth trust on the compounding side, if you want the compounding to keep up, find a place that has really, really, really great compounding options. Like currently, it's Kenya is that place, and it was so good that like we just permanently even moved here. But you want those really great compound. They won't last forever. Eventually, they will die out in Kenya, right? But we'll still be holding them for like 30 years, so it's still worth the move here, right? So if you buy like we had the 18.4607% treasury bond, right? So the treasury bond that was giving you almost twice the ROI of the S&P 500, right? And so stuff like that, you know, if you get a 25-year bond that's kicking out numbers like that, even when the bond rates change, your contract is already secured. You're getting that rate no matter what. So yeah, the rates aren't going to be great forever. They're going to reset probably in the next year or two here. But we got 25-year, 30-year, 20-year bonds, that those rates are locked in on. So it doesn't matter. It makes sense, for us to establish a solid branch here and increase our passport portfolios to this territory because of how good it was, currently. So things like that. You'll do things like that. Eventually, you'll get to a place where you'll have something called a family office. And a lot of times, your family office will be in Singapore just because they have so many incredible incentives for that. And then what'll end up happening is you'll typically do what's called a sacrificial lamb maneuver, and you'll find typically a woman and make that woman the sacrificial lamb who gives up their other citizenships and becomes a Singaporean citizen. You do a woman because Singapore has mandatory military service for men. So you typically find a woman, you typically educate her, so you'll send her, to school, get her an MBA, get her a finance degree, get her a CPA, get her an EA, all of that. So she's highly educated in finance, and then she'll run the family office, which handles all of the investments at the family trust and corporate level, right? So all of those things roll into this first step of getting your family constitution going and getting ready to do big things as a family. All right. Does everybody understand what the hard part of generational wealth is now? It is not the money. That is the easy part. All right. The hard part is the education. The hard part is the hard part. All right. You got it? Any other questions from any of you guys? Facebook, where's Facebook? Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Any other questions from you guys? This live has been running for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Any other questions about the hard part of generational wealth? Books. Read social psychologists, read sociologists, you know. Um, there's a French sociologist, Bourdieu. Read Bourdieu. Um, don't read books on generational wealth. Not yet. You can do that later. But the mindset, you got to get the mindset squared away. Get the mindset squared away and understand the science of it. Understand what you have to put in place in order to kick off that dynastic family and the dynasty continue. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. I think we are good. We're going to go ahead and shut her down then. And I will see you tomorrow. Same time as always. All right, guys. Thanks for being here, Freedom Family. We are signing out. Diaspora Freedom Initiative signing out. See you tomorrow. Same time, same place.